So I think part of the reason I'm up here is that there's some connection with all these folks. So,
Three aging hippies.
so not many people know this, but Martin Holliday's ex-wife babysat me when I was a little kid. Which I didn't find out until a year ago.
No, that's true.
That is true. So Martin Holliday.
Jesse used to be just this big.
So Martin Holliday's from Sheffield, Vermont, where he went to go hide in the woods, and I grew up a couple towns down.
And Jesse's dad was the town doctor, where I occasionally would go in when I cut myself.
Yeah. He was too respectable to go hide in the woods. But and then Mark, known through energy consulting, he slept on my couch a couple of times, which made me actually realize that he is actually a very low energy guy. He won't even stay in hotels. Like a cup of tea in the morning. And Adam, we've spent a year and a half, 2 years, working on a really complicated,
Beautiful house.
and
Unaffordable.
well,
It's affordable to someone.
yeah, right. I mean,
It got built.
got built. And actually, there's a sort of, we can almost make a tenuous connection. My father grew up in Southwest coal mining country, down the road from Roanoke. So I do know that country a little bit, kind of, sort of. So I'm really interested in some of the big questions lurking in high quality construction, low energy construction, passive house construction, and Adam did a really good job this morning about how he got to this room. I'd love Martin and Mark to just do a quick, how did you get to this room? What was your path to getting here? It can be quick, right?
Right. Well, very similar to Adam's is basically I was a hippie in the woods living in a house with no electricity and an old Arco panel and doing the laundry in the sink and lighting candles and fiddling with the mantles on those propane lights that always used to fall apart. Those stupid little Aladdin lamps that never lasted. And then I was kind of a hippie carpenter because that's what the carpenters did when they realized they couldn't grow their own food and needed a little money to put in their broken down cars. And then I just became an editor, and I've always been interested in everybody in the 70s, we were, I don't know what green construction is, but we were building houses out of found materials and interested about solar orientation, all this stuff, all the Mother Earth News and Whole Earth Catalog stuff wasn't called green construction back then. And we did it because we were poor, and we did it because of, Earth Day and concern about the planet. So I guess there is a connection. And then I became editor of Energy Design Update, and now I'm working at Green Building Advisor. So that's about my story in a nutshell. Sort of ditto.
All right. No expansion necessary.
I mean, we're sort of an age, which is, so we all lived in places without electricity, and we all had those struggles, and
It wasn't really that big a struggle.
it wasn't that, and some of us probably look fondly back on the times when things were actually easier in some ways, because we worked harder, but there was lower stress.
Very much so.
But I think it's the same thing. I mean, looking at Adam's stuff this morning, what was interesting to me is sort of the writing and the things that you wrote. A couple of things came across that felt similar to me, and one of which was sort of certainty. The 25-year-old certainty that this and this and this, totally there. And at 59, I know less. I am certain about less than when I started, and I'm sure many of us have had that insight. And so, and then the other thing is this conviction that things were screwed and were going to fall apart immediately. In 1972, it was like, well, we've got the clock is ticking, and limits to growth. And Dana, I lived in the same town and worked with and knew Dana Meadows very well. And so, what's been interesting as a technologist is how technology has kind of slid out the time that we've had and pushed things out to a level where the things that we were worried about 40 years ago, I think, were the limits that we're running out of stuff. But what we've understood over the last 20 years is that our problem isn't sources, our problem is our sinks. There aren't places to put the things we're creating. So it's a very different mindset. It's akin in buildings to worrying about vapor getting into stuff to now worrying about really how do things dry out because you know they're going to get wet. So it's that same kind of shift to what really matters. And what I'm interested in to some extent, because you started it this morning, was not so much like talking about details and talking about the things that get in our way, like codes or unruly subcontractors, but I think it's interesting that Adam was saying, sort of, this is who I am, and this is what I care about, and I'm showing 30 years of kind of staying with the same thing. And I just have two more things, observations. One is my feeling about how this community has expanded, just this profound gratitude that people care about shit like thermal bridges and stuff, where if I'd said those words before Kat Klingenberg came to this country, who would know what I even was talking about? So the expansion of the community is just amazingly inspiring and exciting to me. And then my dominant impression in Denver, how many people were out in Denver for the conference this year? So my dominant impression in Denver was how many people are rediscovering shit that we have known for 30 years.
All right, so that was actually my next question, which is,
So I like the community, but make new mistakes.
okay, so my first question was, what about 2012 feels like deja vu?
The election coming up.
All right.
What did you say?
The election.
But which election does it feel like deja vu to?
Carter Reagan, man. I mean, it was the same exact thing. I said, how can anybody vote for this idiot? I mean, are you really that stupid? You're buying that load of horse hockey? And I feel like it's like, and then immediately saw, everything I believed in get whisked away with cheap oil, and now we got cheap natural gas. And we got another idiot who's spewing BS, and people are going to vote for this
All right,
idiot.
so election, all right.
Mine is going to be different. Overglazed south facades.
That's because of PHPP and people who haven't looked back. And we knew 30 years ago the work of Doug Balcom measuring test cells about how much glass you could get away with, not in the summer, but in the winter. So now we have glass that's like 3 times as good, and we have envelopes that are better. Why do we think we can use twice as much glass?
That's PHPP.
Because PHP says it's okay if you shade it in the summer.
Right.
All right,
Yeah.
Mark, is that yours too? I mean,
No, mine is basically just sort of this whole amnesia of what people learned. And Joe's keynote address of sort of saying where we've come from was really helpful. And I think there were probably a lot of young people, at least in that room, that actually had no idea of the history of superinsulated buildings and how it really started mostly in North America and then went to Europe because we didn't care.
Well, so I can actually line up with that, which is, for number one, though, you can't have amnesia if you never learned it.
Well, that's true.
So we had a better excuse in the 70s.
So
That's right.
and the other thing is, I remember really distinctly, so I went to University of Oregon Architecture School, and that was the home of, the folks who wrote Me, Mechanical, building, John Reynolds and Virginia Cartwright and G.Z. Brown, and they were the daylighting people, they were the solar people, and we had ECS, which was 2 terms of environmental control systems. And when I went back for PassFast training, I realized I kind of sort of halfway learned a bunch of this stuff before. But what I remember was it only got boiled down into rules of thumb. And it was just these sort of like little bite-sized pieces, and I hadn't necessarily really learned it. And I will say, tackling PHPP and working through it, and you're sitting there watching these dials turn back and forth, has been a more rigorous learning education than the rules of thumb ever got me. They just let me like put a little shade out, and then I put the window below it. It was very cursory. So
Well, one of the things I think Mark hit upon, which I tried to make clear in what I was saying, and maybe it didn't quite come across as such, but and it came across in Stephanie's talk, about that house that she did. It was beautiful. was, she was saying, well, these are things that I did that I wouldn't necessarily do again. Or this is, now I've done it once, I could do it better. But there's a lot of stuff like that, I've seen young Passive House folks. I've got a fellow that I'm mentoring in the state over from me, who's a great young man. He's working with an older fellow who I really like, and he was really bemoaning the fact that he was having problems with houses that he built. And I was like, man, you're 30 years old. You're just learning this stuff, I mean, what you need to do is get some graybeards around you to kind of hold your hand and help you through it so you don't make those same mistakes. And I think that's what I was trying to say earlier is that anybody who hasn't done it, who's only done it theoretically, there's lots of people who have, just reach out to them. Send them a drawing, send them a calculation, say, just give me an opinion.
And so there's a big piece of what feels like everybody's doing here, which is changing construction culture. That this is this massive, hopefully, education that changes construction culture.
There's a lot more focus on airtightness, and that's a big change. That's one thing we didn't get right when we started in the 70s. But that gradually toward the end of the 70s and the early 80s, if we were reading what researchers were learning, we started to figure out because of Harold Orr and Rob Dumont and the Princeton house doctors. And it's been great to see that it's every single year conventional construction is paying more attention to airtightness.
Well, I mean, do you remember doing double envelope houses?
I never built one back in the old days, but I definitely built a bunch of foam sheath houses in 1981.
They're probably doing okay, aren't they?
Yeah, well,
No, they're rotting up.
well, mine is still doing fine.
Very good.
I mean, I put foam on my house and I've opened up the walls.
Double envelope.
Exactly, the double envelope house.
Oh, you meant the double up with
Yeah.
the air circulating
Yeah,
around. I thought you meant
well,
double wall. No,
You just want to learn
no.
about a thermal bridge quick.
Yeah, yeah,
Go
yeah.
back a year later in Virginia after you build a double envelope house and fix it.
Well, and I guess construction culture changed. When I look out the window at that big old commercial building out there, they're sticking it. They've got a magic blue sticky air barrier.
Right.
That's true.
And that didn't come from the Passive House community. I think it came. Am I correct? It came from Building Science Corp and the Mass Air Barrier Code, or is that a
It's
extrapolation?
everywhere.
It came from a lot of building failures, so it came partially from the
Yeah, but
insurance
liabilities,
industry.
yeah. Liabilities. I mean, it's some of these universities, like around us at least, they have consulting firms that all they consult on is their envelopes.